It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Labour peer Charlie Faulkner, Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy, Conservative MP Antoinette Sambach and Telegraph leader writer Tim Stanley. So, what's going on today?
I don't think that's where we're going to end up. I think it's a million to one against.
Boris Johnson may think the chances of no deal are slim, but MPs are gearing up for another go at blocking it.
What do we want?
Liberate it!
When do we want it?
Now!
Should our artistic institutions be more careful about who they take money from? And anger as an MP accused of anti-Semitism is readmitted to the Labour Party.
He can now stand and we will have Jew haters sitting as Labour MPs under Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm frankly astonished that she could say such an outrageous thing as she did.
We'll talk more about that later on in the programme. But first of all, let me show you, our guests and our viewers, a Guardian story which suggests, as we said at the beginning, that MPs may be going to vote to amend financial legislation that withholds cash to a number of key Whitehall departments in the event of leaving the EU without a deal. Tory MPs will try to stop no-deal Brexit with amendment. Charlie Faulkner, are we going to get a government shutdown?
Well, when you say a government shutdown, if this motion that I've read about in The Guardian passes, then it means if there was no deal, then there wouldn't be any money left to spend on health and education. And
but
things like that.
That amendment could come up shortly, before you actually get to any idea of no deal. So do you think we could get a government shutdown?
I think that some process will be developed in the Commons, which in effect says you can only have no deal if Parliament has voted knowingly for no deal. And that seems to me to be absolutely correct. We should not default into no deal. If there is going to be no deal, it is something that the Commons should have addressed and voted for. The precise procedural way that will be achieved, I'm not sure, but I'm quite sure procedural problems will not prevent there being that lock.
Belinda?
I think Parliament's got to be quite careful because people watching the game playing again to try and prevent no deal. You know, we've already had 3 years of so many sort of little, what many people would say, tricks to try and delay or stop Brexit, and just more of the same, more delay when businesses are crying out for certainty, when voters are crying out just to get it done. I don't think it doesn't enhance Parliament's reputation by continuing this kind of game playing in such a prestigious.
Is that what it is, game playing, Antoinette? Would you be one of those Conservative MPs who could amend legislation that would withhold cash to vital departments?
I'm not sure about that particular process, but I made it very clear to my electorate that I would support a deal to leave the EU, but I also made it clear and have made it consistently clear that I will not support no deal. And the reality is that the people that blocked us leaving were the most extreme no dealers, and had they voted prior to the 29th of March for the deal, then we would have left. And I think it's wrong for 34 MPs to hold Parliament to ransom. So I think there will be a process, and I think that's the reality that the leadership candidates have to address, which they haven't, and that's one of the reasons why I supported Rory Stewart. So I resent it being labelled as a trickster because actually I'm representing my constituents, and the North West stands to lose 80,000 jobs according to University of Sussex reports in a no-deal scenario.
I resent those MPs being called extremists. These are MPs that are just honouring the manifesto they got voted in by, and also
the
respecting
manifesto
the referendum.
committed us to
and they got called extremists and rebels, and actually they're the ones respecting democracy, and that's how people see it from the outside.
Vote Leave were very clear, and so were all the Leave parties, that it would be for Parliament to decide the manner in which we left. And that was the basis on which the referendum was argued, that how we would leave would be delegated. And the only question was, should we look in principle, should we leave our membership of the EU? And to try and twist the result afterwards is wrong, I would argue.
Tim?
The Tory manifesto famously also said that no deal would be better than a bad deal. So that's the basis on which those Eurosceptic MPs are arguing. Two things. One, people sitting outside of Parliament might see this as an attempt to hold the people hostage, saying you would withdraw funds from critical departments in order to prevent a no-deal Brexit. I don't think that's going to go down very badly, which is one reason why I suspect it won't happen. Second, it sounds a bit like these MPs are acting from weakness. Their problem is that they're running out of legislation that they can amend between now and October the 31st. So rather than trying to just stop no deal, they're trying to make no deal as bad as possible so that no Prime Minister could possibly want to do it. Beyond that, they also have the option towards October, if they feel it's necessary, of a confidence vote to try to bring the government down. In order to do that, they need to have the support of some Tory MPs. They might get that margin if the Tories lose the by-election in August. All this maths is very complicated. The point is that the room for manoeuvre of Remain MPs is shrinking the closer we get to October the 31st.
But should the matter be decided on that sort of procedural muddle?
But it is.
No, but that's
the argument of Remainers rightly is that Parliament is in the driving seat. Parliament must get this done.
Surely,
I agree with that, and Parliament is itself running out of road for what it can do to
Tim, whatever the public want.
This is not Remainers. This is actually most of the people who have supported preventing no deal have voted to leave.
Yes, yes.
So it is not Remainers as you classify us. I voted for the Prime Minister's deal 3 times, and I really feel that it would be wrong for whoever's going to be leader of the Prime Minister to try and get round Parliament, and I think we need to have a clear process that allows Parliament
just to add, they probably, having said everything I've just said, it may well be that they can't get around Parliament, because eventually some legislation, if you want to leave with a deal, will have to be put to Parliament towards October, and there'll be an opportunity to amend it then. We will find out in around August or September how serious Boris is about leaving without a deal if he doesn't schedule that legislation. If he doesn't, then it means he wants to leave without a deal.
Do you think they have got the bottle to follow through on their no-deal commitments, both Jeremy Hunt and particularly Boris Johnson, by October the 31st?
Personally, I think it's almost irrelevant. It's like the argument about proroguing Parliament. It's not a case of what you intend to do. It's a case of what you refuse to take off the table, because what both men want to do is force the EU to renegotiate the backstop. So I understand the question, but I honestly don't think Boris or Jeremy Hunt, sorry, I should say Boris Johnson, stop saying
yes,
Boris. Sorry,
Boris
very
Johnson.
bad. Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt, I don't think either of them wants no deal. They just refuse to take it off the table because they see it as a negotiating tool.
Would you be prepared to vote against a Tory government in order to prevent no deal if we're in September and no deal has been agreed?
I would be prepared to vote for amendments that would prevent no deal, but if you're asking me in terms of a confidence vote that would bring in a Corbyn government, no, I wouldn't.
You mean amendments to a no confidence vote?
I mean amendments to legislation. So I think there will be some procedural way that we will be able to prevent it in due course. And I think that process will be found. It's not clear at the moment how that will happen.
Well, let's just have a look at this from Diane Abbott, Labour MP, frontbencher, because she has tweeted the Labour Party still haven't come forward with a clear, unequivocal message in terms of whether they would back Remain in a second referendum that they are supporting on any agreed deal. Diane Abbott has said, and this is in response to somebody else, saying, like you, I have supported Labour's Brexit strategy so far, I should say, but like you, I am beginning to worry.
She's a member of the Labour Party. She's a frontbencher. How can she put it like that? I've supported my party up to this point. She's a member of the shadow cabinet.
Well, she hasn't done it easily, it sounds like, has she?
We're in a new era where policy is debated in a very open way, and that's not just the Labour Party, but the whole of Parliament appears to debate policy in a much less rigid way than previously. But is she not saying we have got to be sure that we can stop no deal? And the whole of this year has been people saying against Mrs May, you're just trying to run down the clock. And it's all got out of hand because Mrs May is now exiting stage left or stage right, and two people whose position, this is Mr Hunt and Mr Johnson, is completely unclear whether they really know what their own position is at the moment.
Who are they going to negotiate with? I mean,
nobody between now and the 31st
The reality is that there's no one there.
Exactly.
The new commission won't come into place until the 1st of November at the earliest. And I think these promises that they're going to somehow through meeting people on sun lounges around Europe, because they'll all be away on their holidays, negotiate this new deal, I think is fantastic.
But what's the reason for saying you've got to do it by the 31st of October, even though there is no President of the European Council, even though there is no President of the European Commission?
Because I think he is saying what he thinks Brexiteers want to hear. And
Yes.
as we've learnt over the last 3 years, there's a big difference between what politicians are saying and what they actually do, and the treaties they actually write up. And that's what the Brexit Party are here to do, in part, use our platform to watch eagle-eyed over the next Prime Minister in terms of what he says to placate the Brexiteers one side and then to impress the Remainers the other side. And at the end of the day, we don't know what he's going to do.
You don't trust Boris Johnson?
Well, we'll wait and see. Let's see.
Can I just ask Antoinette,
moment.
because you said very clearly that you wouldn't vote in a no-confidence motion brought by Jeremy Corbyn that might usher in a Corbyn government. But let's say it was a no-confidence motion that you could win to stop no deal, and there could be a different sort of government, could be a different sort of Conservative government or a government of national unity. Would you then do it in order to prevent no deal?
Look, we're speculating now, and I want to see whether or not we can find the procedure and processes before we get to that moment to try and make sure that that we have the space to negotiate a proper deal or give the candidates an opportunity to negotiate a deal. And as we can see, they can't do that before the 31st, which inevitably means an extension. Or we have to have an opportunity for May's deal to come back to Parliament, knowing that 26 Labour MPs have signed a letter saying that they would now support it.
Let's move on, because the Tory leadership candidates have been talking about things beyond Brexit, amazingly enough, and they're planning something of what looks like a spending spree. Let's speak to Tom Waters of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who have looked at both leadership contenders' tax and spending plans. Tom, can you take us through the headline spending commitments for Boris Johnson first?
Sure. So the policies we've seen out of Boris Johnson mainly so far have been on the tax side. So he's announced a significant increase in the high rate threshold, so that basically benefits people with incomes over £50,000 a year. And he's also suggested he wants to increase the point at which people start paying national insurance contributions. And so that's currently about £8,500. So any worker earning more than that would gain from that. We haven't seen so much from him yet on the spending side, at least not in the way of sort of concrete proposals. And your view on these spending proposals or tax proposals? Well, what's clear is these policies don't come cheap. The high rate threshold policy would cost about £9 billion. The national insurance policy would be at least £11 billion. And so we're looking at a fairly large increase in government borrowing if this sort of policy did come into place. All right, stay with us because we'll come back to talk about Jeremy Hunt's policies. Let me just show our guests this in the Financial Times, because the article in the Financial Times goes even further in terms of spending proposals. It's saying that Boris Johnson is eyeing up a public spending spree with Sajid Javid, who's obviously dropped out of the race, as Chancellor, in the region of £100 billion of infrastructure fund over 5 years. Tim, have the Tories abandoned fiscal prudence in order to get Brexit?
It was some time ago. That was abandoned quite a while ago when austerity was essentially ended under the May administration. So this isn't a big change.
Well, those figures are quite a big change. I mean, they may have rhetorically said that austerity was over.
One must make the distinction between analysis and comment here. Personally, I'm into fiscal conservatism and discipline, so I would disagree with this. But the counter-argument is, first of all, that if you say take the middle-class tax cuts, under the Tories, it was the very well-paid and the very poorly paid who tended to get tax cuts. But a lot of people in the middle, because of fiscal drag, ended up paying more tax. So there's an element of just evening up and making it fairer. But also, if you're going to do Brexit, you need some supply and demand there. You need to kickstart the economy. And so the argument is that with, Laffer curve here, when you cut taxes, you tend to get more income. If you cut taxes, particularly things like the big corporation tax cut that Jeremy Hunt is proposing, then you turbocharge the economy and that gets you through Brexit. So, frankly, whoever wins this contest, whatever happens, no deal, a deal, or we stay, the economy is probably going to slump a little bit, and that's going to require some government action like tax cuts and spending.
Is this the time to be giving middle-class tax cuts, to quote Tim?
Well, I don't agree with that policy of Boris Johnson. I think we should be looking at measures that will help the low-paid and reduce our tax credit budget, which releases up that money then to reinvest. Like Tim, I am a fiscal conservative, But I also am someone who would want to share the proceeds of growth. And I think, again, one of the reasons why I backed Rory Stewart was that he made that commitment to prudence.
You said under my leadership will be realistic, prudent and sensible.
Yeah.
Right, so have they
unelectable.
abandoned... Inevitable, and wouldn't they all say that? But have Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt abandoned that fiscal prudence?
Well, I think the reality is that unless we have a deal, we know that there is some money set aside to deal with no deal, but I would argue that we can only release that money if there's a deal.
What do you make of the spending pledges? Do you like the sound of those, Belinda, and also the tax cuts?
I think, the Tories are in quite a dire situation. They need to dangle a big, juicy carrot to all their Leave voters in the middle-class section that they have, I feel, abandoned.
Do you like the sound of them?
I'm fiscally conservative personally myself as well. However, I do think there needs to be quite a bit of sort of economic creativity and vision around the next year or two as we are possibly heading for big change. So I appreciate the vision there, but we'll just see if it follows through. I mean, he's just trying to get the voters back as well.
Well, what's the Brexit Party trying to do? What are you offering? I mean, surely this is the time. If you're wanting to criticise Conservative economic policy, what is the Brexit Party's economic policy?
I completely agree. In fact, on Sunday, we're having a rally of over 5,500 people.
And what are you telling them?
Well, that's when we are uncovering some of our policies there. So if you'd like to come and listen, it's £2.50 to come and join us. So it would be great to have you there on Sunday.
And do you know what they are?
Well, we've been talking a lot and getting together with fellow MEPs, but also asking all our supporters. We're doing a bottom-up discussion where we're taking their ideas and asking them what they feel, and everything will be... Well,
right. Now, the last time I had someone from the Brexit Party on, I was also told there was going to be a rally where policies would be unveiled, and obviously not the economic one. So on Sunday, after that, we'll have a complete prospectus on the Brexit Party's policies.
Perhaps not complete. We are still only a few weeks old, and we do want to make sure...
More than a few weeks now, but yes.
Since April, so yes, a couple of months. And I do think it's right to take our time over...
You might not have much time. There could be a general election coming.
But we have to get it right, and we do have people from different, areas of the political spectrum in our party, and it's really good to find out the common ground of common sense we have between us, and some of our policies will be unveiled on Sunday, and it's very exciting, and come and join us.
Right. What do you think, Charlie, listening to this? Because on the Jeremy Corbyn side, in terms of anti-austerity, this, as Belinda says, could be a big carrot to voters.
Well, what Belinda's going to propose...
No, not Belinda.
Sorry,
she was talking about the Tory policies.
OK, now, as far as the 100 billion is concerned of capital expenditure, I don't know what the detail of that is, but that is not a bad idea, it seems to me. Infrastructure, 110 billion. The idea of taking 9 billion of what Philip Hammond has said is a 26 billion headroom, that's a third, and giving it to those who are currently on the highest band of tax and knocking some of them out of that high band of tax seems a very, very bad idea. As I think everybody agrees, the effect of austerity has been that poverty has gone up quite considerably because welfare benefits have gone down. So surely the first thing you would do, if you've said you've brought austerity to an end, is say what you're going to do for those who have most suffered from austerity, rather than saying to those who are in the highest tax bands at the moment, some of you are now going to go out of the highest tax bands. And it makes one doubt what you mean when you say austerity's come to an end.
So, for example, with Mr Hunt's tax cut proposal for corporations, I would really welcome the idea that a lower rate of tax is paid by companies who pay their employees the living wage rather than the minimum wage. And those proposals have been adopted in some other countries. I think there's a 10p difference on the tax rate for those companies that have a corporate responsibility towards their employees and pay them the living wage. And I think those sorts of ideas are really interesting.
What about, I mean, the Resolution Foundation did a thing that indicated that child poverty had gone up dramatically since 2010, and the reason was because welfare cuts had been savage between 2010 and 2019.
It's relative,
an indirect effect by corporation tax being reduced seems an incredibly slow way of bringing austerity to an end.
So it's relative.
Relative to what?
It's relative to the average wage. So and wages have been going up. So as wages increase...
But only recently, isn't it, Antoinette? After 10 years of stagnation.
You'd agree with me, wouldn't you? You'd agree with me.
But there has been a freeze on the way that benefits rise, which is lifting this in the next financial year.
All right.
So I think we will see some pressure easing in that.
Let's go back.
system.
Let's go back to Tom at the Institute for Fiscal Studies to tell us a bit more about the spending pledges from Jeremy Hunt, and also, Tom, this idea that Tim said that some of these tax and spend policies will sort of pay for themselves.
Yes, so on the tax side first, Jeremy Hunt has also suggested some sort of reduction in national insurance contributions, but there's also this cut in the corporate tax rate. So that's currently at 19%. He wants to move it to 12.5%. That would cost something of the order of £13 billion. Now, it probably would increase the amount of investment in the UK. There's not really any chance of it paying for itself.
Right, Tim, what do you say to that?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm actually a fiscal conservative, so here I'm defending something I don't actually agree with. But it is true historically that when you've had significant tax cuts, they very often ended up generating more revenue than they had before. And I mean, the most recent example was the very highest band was taken down, and the government argues that as a consequence of people repatriating income, staying in the country, paying taxes here, spending more, etc., income actually ends up going up to the Treasury. So that is the argument for it. Personally, what I would say at this stage in the contest is no one should be making specific pledges about anything. In fact, do one of two things. Either be incredibly specific, because we need to know the exact details of things. So, for instance, the immigration pledge on the points-based system, does that mean you're getting rid of, is it going to be all points, or is it going to be an element of short-term visas? So either be really specific or don't be specific. Because as a Prime Minister, you need lassitude, especially when you're entering a negotiation with the EU. We don't know what the economy is going to be like in 6 months to a year's time. So I think the idea of going to this election right now and saying, I'm going to cut precisely this band's tax by this amount, businesses by this amount, when you don't know what the fiscal picture will be in 6 months to a year's time, I think that's very foolish. And it seems silly to me, on the one hand, when it comes to the Brexit negotiations, everything's on the table. But at this stage in the race, the candidates are going out of their way to take everything off the table.
Well, then do
by signing up to this economic program.
There's 160,000 people in a particular sort of demographic primarily, and they're aiming all their promises at them. So you're getting this completely warped view of fiscal policy because it's only aiming at a small number.
Yeah.
How many of these promises, however specific they are, the corporation tax for business, the higher rate of tax for those people who are in the higher band and want to get out of it, how many of those will we see translated into a budget subsequently?
Although where I would defend
What
them,
do you think, Tim, on that?
There's no
Do you have a
denying
view about that?
the big
Do you have a
difference
view about
between Labour and the Tories is Tories see themselves as the party of work. So
Yeah.
the reason why they're not addressing this welfare issue is because they see the way that people improve themselves is through work. Therefore, they want a tax system that incentivises
There are
work
the
and makes sure you
disabled.
keeps as much
There
of
are
your money
people with children
as
who
possible.
cannot work. All of these people who
this is
Mrs May
true.
has specifically identified. What are you doing about them in the promises that your leaders are making?
They're not my leader. I'm not a member of the
Well,
Conservative.
you don't write for the Daily Telegraph.
But Antoinette
Aren't
should
they
be able to
in-house
answer.
paper
I mean,
for
is it the
Telegraph?
case now that people are focusing in this contest much more on how tough you can be on Brexit, and when it comes to the economy, you can afford to be a little bit more liberal because they're proving themselves to a Tory tribe in a different way?
Well, I think there is a lot of tough talk on Brexit, and again, that's why I supported a different candidate. I supported a candidate that I felt was being open about some of the choices that our next leader is going to make. And until we know what that choice is, I don't think you can make the spending promises because you don't know what headroom you've got. You don't know, as Tim has said, it's very clear. And on all the evidence that has been published, that if there's a no-deal Brexit, it will have a substantial shock to the economy. And that's one of the reasons why I don't want that to happen.
You said you like the infrastructure
Well, I don't know.
element.
I mean, I like the idea of
I like
100
the
billion
idea
on
of-
yeah.
There's a risk of Labour being outmanoeuvred here with its own plans from its costed 2017
I can't remember
manifesto.
which of the two profligate Tory soon-to-be Prime Ministers offered the 100 billion. Was it Boris or was it Jeremy Hunt?
Boris Johnson, with Sajid
all right,
Javid as the suggested chancellor.
I genuinely think it is a good idea to spend money sensibly, and 100 billion does not sound remotely off the page in relation to that, but I'm not sure it'll ever happen with Boris.
I think he suggested a review of HS2, and
Yeah.
I know certainly that we need to look at HS3 in the north.
Yeah.
So it's not...
Is that
again,
included in his 100 billion?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
In which case it's not that big. Well, it's still a big figure. It's
It
not
is a
that
big
big a
figure.
figure. Plus, HS2 is hated by a lot of that 160,000 people.
So is he for it or against it?
Well, Jeremy Hunt
We
is
don't know.
for it.
I mean,
Jeremy Hunt has said he
But
is
what
for
about
HS2.
Boris? I'm not sure. Are you saying he's for that HS2 or not? We don't know.
It's being reviewed.
OK, right.
Melissa, what are your views on HS2?
We are not so keen on it. I don't believe in the Brexit Party in terms of it being, again, London to the north. We're more focused on the infrastructure between the northern towns. And instead of propping up London again and trying to get so much down to London, we want to make mini Londons in the north and have infrastructure between them rather than always between London. I think, as far as I know. Right,
let's go back to Tom at the IFS. Tom, listening to those pledges from Jeremy Hunt that could cost between 40 and 46 billion pounds, according to you, how do you imagine he would fund that?
Yeah, I think that's a key question. So a lot of that cost comes from increasing defence spending, which costs something of the order of £15 billion a year. And so, we're essentially looking at increases in spending and reductions in tax. And so kind of logically what that implies is more borrowing from the government. And so it looks like that's kind of the road that he's going down. Of course, it could be funded by tax rises he hasn't mentioned so far or spending cuts elsewhere. But at least on kind of the current set of policies, that's what it looks like it would imply.
Well, I bet he won't be mentioning any tax rises in this contest, will he, if he wants to stand any chance of winning against or with Tory grassroots members. But what do you think the answer would be, Tim?
One thing that doesn't pay for itself is more defence spending. I think that's an economic rule we can probably all agree on. But nonetheless, the armed forces probably do need modernisation. We do face new threats. We've got problems with Iran, we've got problems with Russia, and we have commitments to make as part of NATO. I think any candidate, including probably even a Labour one, would be talking about defence increases. The interesting question is, where are they going to squeeze? What will they not raise? That's the sort of specifics we need to get out of them in the next few weeks.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom, at the IFS. Let's move on, because we're going to talk about the decision to readmit the Labour MP, Chris Williamson. He was suspended from the Labour Party for what they said were deeply offensive and inappropriate remarks, which fell below the standards expected of Labour MPs and makes it harder to deal with anti-Semitism in the party. But he's back in. Let's just remind ourselves of what Chris Williamson said at a Sheffield Momentum rally, which prompted his suspension.
The party that's done more to stand up to racism is now being demonised as a racist, bigoted party. And I've got to say, I think our party's response has been partly responsible for that. Because in my opinion, I never have, I've got to say, we've backed off far too much. We've given too much ground. We've been too apologetic.
Well, that was Chris Williamson. It resulted in his suspension from the party. He's been readmitted. We asked the Labour Party for an interview and they said no one was available. We asked Chris Williamson himself, but we're still waiting for a response from him. We can talk to Tosh MacDonald, who is a close friend of Chris Williamson, former ASLEF president and councillor in Doncaster. Tosh, welcome to the programme. Was it the right decision to readmit Chris?
Yes, I think it was the right decision to readmit Chris. I think the body that looks at it has looked at it and come up with a decision that Chris should be allowed back into the party, or his suspension should be...
What do you think, Charlie?
I think it was the wrong decision. I think it sends a terrible message about the Labour Party. Chris was suspended for what was described as a pattern of behaviour. It wasn't just saying that the Labour was too apologetic. He had, over time, aligned himself with people who had either been expelled from the party for anti-Semitism or people who had committed unarguable anti-Semitic acts. For example, he had signed a petition and circulated it in support of a man called Gilad Atzmon, who'd been banned by Islington from playing jazz in an Islington venue. What Gilad Atzmon had done, he'd promoted Holocaust denial, he'd blamed the Grenfell Tower fire on people he described as Jerusalemites, and he'd suggested that Hitler's attacks on the Jews had been in response to the Jews declaring war on Germany. These are terrible anti-Semitic things. And when asked, why did you do that? He said, oh, he didn't realise. But of course, surely if you were petitioning Islington to let the jazz singer back, the jazz musician back in, you'd have found out why he'd been banned in the first place. I think what the Labour Party's committee did today was wrong, because they didn't even push it up to the full-blown disciplinary tribunal, which must have been the minimum that should have been done.
Right. Let's listen to Chris Williamson. He's responded to those allegations that we've just heard there from Charlie Faulkner.
Well, I heard what Charlie Faulkner said, and
He's wrong in what he said actually about me. He claimed I'd signed a petition relating to somebody called Gilad Atzmon. That's not true. In fact, I didn't sign the petition at all. But I don't accept his assertion. Look, Labour's an anti-racist party, and we're defined by our anti-racist credentials. The Labour Party were the backbone of the Anti-Nazi League in the 1970s. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader, as a record second to none in standing up to all forms of bigotry and racism. And, we've obviously got to work together.
Charlie?
First of all, in relation to the petition in relation to Gilad Atzmon, he supported that by social media, so he may be right when he says he didn't sign it, but he supported it. Secondly, he's absolutely right about the Labour Party's role in relation to the Anti-Nazi League. What we did in the 70s as honourable conduct against racism gives us no free pass in relation to anti-Semitism. And what Chris has done is align himself with the anti-Semitics, and that is absolutely unacceptable.
Right. Tosh, what do you say to that? You've just heard a wealth of evidence that has been laid out by Charlie Faulkner, and that Chris Williamson has given succour to people who've been expelled from the party for anti-Semitism. Why should he have been allowed back in?
He should be allowed back in because Chris Williamson, as somebody I know really well, a good friend and comrade, has not got a racist bone in his body, not got a bigoted bone in his body. Now, look, I'm proud to have worked in the trade union movement for many years, and I'm proud of my union, ASLEF. We just launched On Track for Diversity in Parliament last week, and if I can be allowed to speak without being interrupted, it would help. Then, and what we've done, we're proud.
No one's interrupted you.
We've stamped out in workplaces. We've worked against all forms of racism and bigotry. And the way we've done that is not when somebody says something wrong, jumping down the throat and having hysteria. What we have done is we've tried to educate people in what's wrong. I mean, I've been accused of anti-Semitism for something I said which I don't see as anti-Semitism. We should be educating people, not witch hunting people, not having mass hysteria when somebody says
have you been re-educated then, in that sense, if you said something anti-Semitic? Should Chris Williamson be re-educated before being allowed back into the Labour Party?
Well, we should all be re-educated. If any of us are making mistakes, we should be re-educated. We shouldn't have a riot after us or hysteria following us about. I said when I spoke at International Brigade Memorial Trust annual commemoration that I'm too young to remember Spain. My Spain was the anti-apartheid movement. And I said for people coming into the movement today, the thing that internationalises them, Palestine. For that, I was social media, I was trolled for being an anti-Semite. I don't know what's anti-Semitic about that.
Right.
Why that is anti-Semitic.
Right, but the party has standards, and the party said that Chris Williamson, and let's talk about him, because he is the person who is being looked at today and been readmitted to the party, and the party found he had breached standards. Why is it that only after a few months he's been readmitted to the party when Charlie Faulkner has said that actually it should have been taken much more seriously because he's backed people who have repeatedly made anti-Semitic comments?
But again, people are supposedly making anti-Semitic comments. We need a wider discussion on what is and what isn't anti-Semitic. As I've given my example of what I said, and I don't know what is anti-Semitic.
All right, well, let's ask Charlie.
Well, I gave some examples.
Find nothing wrong for it.
Would anybody doubt that it's anti-Semitic to deny the Holocaust? Would anybody doubt it's anti-Semitic to blame the Grenfell Tower fire on, quote, Jerusalemites? Would anybody suggest it is anti-Semitic to say that Hitler's actions against the Jews were a direct response to Jews declaring war on Germany?
They are plainly anti-Semitic.
Yeah, so we're not...
But
sorry.
many people are being accused of anti-Semitism and not knowing why. You know, we can criticise the state of Israel in the way...
I completely appreciate, Tosh, that there may be legitimate issues about whether or not this is a legitimate, in a particular case, attack on the state of Israel, which is within what is acceptable. The things that Chris approved of or supported were not even in the same planet as those sorts of issues. They were absolutely, explicitly anti-Semitic. Not what he said, but the people he was supporting. And that is the problem, because it gives the strongest possible impression by letting him off with a rap on the knuckles, that the Labour Party are perfectly happy for people as senior as Chris to line themselves up with anti-Semitics?
Tosh?
Well, I don't think Chris would knowingly align himself with somebody who's anti-Semitic. I don't believe that for 1 minute. Again, we come back to education, not lynch mobs.
Is that what this has been, a lynch mob, the Labour Party actually investigating Chris Williamson?
Well, the way the whole anti-Semitism thing seems to come that way. It's somebody says something wrong, and then there's an attack, a wave of criticism. We should be educating people. If somebody makes a mistake, if what I said at the International Brigade event was wrong, tell me why it's wrong. And educate us. Don't just lynch us and jump on us.
All right, Tosh, thank you.
Tosh, just one more thing. Chris arranged for a film showing of a thing called The Witch Hunt, which is about Jackie Walker. And Jackie Walker came to the Commons, and she had been expelled by the Labour Party for conduct unbecoming. I'm quite sure that's the precise formulation of the rule, which is about her allegation that the Jews were responsible for the slave trade. Why was Chris promoting that event after Jackie Walker had been expelled? Isn't that lining up with somebody whom the Labour Party has thrown out for behaviour that is anti-Semitic?
But Jackie Walker is a black Jewish woman, and she has her opinions, and she's made those opinions known. The party has gone through its procedures, and she's been kicked out of the party. When I saw the film Witch Hunt, which I think was a very well-made film, and I asked some questions that need answering, Jackie Walker was still suspected at that point, not expelled. I don't know when Chris arranged the film of that showing of that film.
He was showing the film in February 2019, and she'd already been expelled.
All right, Tosh, we're going to stop it there. The line is a little bit bad, but thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Are you doing your investigation? Is that continuing?
I stepped back when the Equalities Commission stepped forward, but I think it's going to take a lot of time. The existence of the Equality Commission report is not making any difference to the way that the Labour Party appears to be dealing with it. So I'm keen to see if I can do something to try and deal with what is an incredibly corrosive and indeed existential threat to the Labour Party.
Why are you still in the Labour Party then?
Because I very much believe in the things that the Labour Party believe in, but I do not believe in anti-Semitism.
Right, but your colleagues left, a number of them, partly over the issue of anti-Semitism. Are you not giving succour to people within the party whom you think are anti-Semitic?
I'm not giving succour to people who I believe to be anti-Semitic, and I'm not leaving.
Right, and that's definite?
That's definite.
All right, and that investigation by the Equalities Commission, of course, is only the second investigation they've done into racism in a political party. The first one was the BNP. How does that make you feel?
Ashamed, but I think it's a good thing that there is such an investigation.
All right, we're going to move on. Take a look at this poster. It's the National Portrait Gallery advertising their Portrait Award sponsored by BP. Now, it has angered a number of artists, including our next guest, who's going to come onto set now, Paul Benny. He signed a letter to the gallery's director, Nicholas Cullinan, arguing that the relationship between the gallery and BP should end. Welcome to the programme. Why, Paul?
Well, I just feel a bit like a fish out of water in a politics programme. Normally I'm in this painting studio at this time of day.
Imagine it's something similar. But tell us what your problem is with the decision by the National Portrait Gallery.
Well, look, we're all beneficiaries of the fossil fuel industry and have been for generations. And we're all sort of compromised in that respect. But I feel that, and this isn't about, I think, pointing the finger at one particular company or one particular director, certainly not of the NPG. I mean, this has been a generational thing. It's been going on for a very long time. And I've certainly benefited myself from association with this particular prize. Even before BP were involved, it was the John Player Award, if you remember.
Yeah, but they have sponsored it for about 30 years, haven't they?
Indeed.
Right. So
I'm older than that.
So why now sort of raise this issue and expect the national?
I finally got to a position, and as have many other artists, where although we all understand how with arts funding being reduced year on year, it becomes more and more difficult for artists to find find a way to exhibit their work unless it's with these big institutions who are sponsored by companies who we feel are compromising, in this case, our environment. And so, as we all know, this is a big issue for all of us, which is why I'm here, I guess.
Right.
This is something that goes beyond just the confines of the National Portrait Gallery and affects us all.
It is a bigger conversation, and there have been various artistic institutions that have severed links or refused donations, most notably recently with the Sackler family. Tim, is this the right thing to do when arts funding is under strain and needs as much support as it can get?
It's a tricky question to ask, because one would hope that if anyone has integrity, it's artists. To paint the world as they see it and to reflect in their work what they believe. And if I felt as strongly as some artists feel about BP, I would not feel comfortable in any way being associated with their money. Sometimes people like me on the right complain about woke capitalism, about corporations deciding to cut off sponsors and make apparently political decisions. And we complain about that because they often make decisions that we disagree with. But on the other hand, I'm quite happy about the idea of capitalism and institutions becoming more ethical and thinking about what they do and who they give advertising to and who they take sponsorship from. I'm not opposed to that. I suspect that in 20, 30 years' time, the idea of anything being financed by fossil fuels might be controversial. I think the same would probably be true of big farming. And there might be a number of other.
I think also we've got to understand that the fossil fuel industry is still being subsidised to the tune of 10.8, I think, or 9 billion a year, as opposed from their subsidies that they receive for fossil fuel, for renewables, which is a fraction of that. So, you know, I think that's changing year on year, and I think as things like that change, their ability to have largesse decreases, and other companies will fill the gap, like the huge renewables industries, for instance.
What do you think, Belinda?
I think people need to have as much access to art as possible, and that does come with funding. So where is the funding going to come from? Is it going to then be on the taxpayer, or it's essential enough people get enough access to all these incredible exhibitions? And where do you draw the line? You know, I totally respect and understand that you have your own red lines.
I think that the lines are always shifting.
Well, I just hope
as
it
you
doesn't
move through
affect
this sort of morass, you step onto the line which we all sort of agree with, certainly as artists anyway.
What is the correct relationship then between private funding and arts institutions?
Well, I think it's really, that's a decision between the institution and its artists, in effect. And I mean, I'm certainly one of a number of MPs that have signed a declaration requesting that our pension fund divest itself from fossil fuel investments. And so I do understand some of the issues, but I would also say in relation to some of the government subsidy, if we get proper carbon capture and storage, we will need the oil fields in the North Sea in order to pump the carbon into them. And therefore there is
a little bit further down the line, right?
It is, but the important thing is to make sure that those lines are still open in order to do that in the most cost-effective way. And
it's a process.
Yes.
Is that woke capitalism, Tim? What happened to Annette's just talked about?
Well, what is woke, and what is actually what Conservatives want, which is freedom of choice. The freedom of the choice of the company to say, of the investor to say, I'm not going to invest in this thing. The freedom of the institution to say, I'm not going to take money. And the freedom of the artist to say, I don't want to exhibit here because I don't approve of that. It's a difficult thing for Conservatives to square because we believe in freedom, and sometimes people choose freely to make woke choices.
You've got 20 seconds.
Are you saying that the National Portrait Gallery shouldn't take any money from BP at all? You can make your choice, but why should those people
they should open that conversation up?
All right.
We can all be participants.
And I'm going to have to end the conversation. Well, not end the conversation, but certainly say goodbye to our viewers at this point. Bye-bye.
Well, that's your lot for now, I suppose. One thing I did miss yesterday, which I should have streamed, which is Democratic Debate, but there's one on tonight, so that might be about 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know what channel it's going to be on, but hopefully I'll catch the bugger this time, because I know it's on today. Well, tomorrow morning, I think it will be, technically speaking, about 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, something like that. Depends what time it starts. But Bernie Sanders on this one today. Tulsi Gabbard was on the other one yesterday. Cory Booker, there was like 20 of them, 10 of them on the stage. It was a bit mad. I didn't really watch all of it, to be fair. Only caught some of it. Question time's on today as well, so we're going to be doing question time, normal time, 10:35. So, and we'll be around for question time later on. So yeah, have a good day everybody, and I will see you later on.